Welcome back to the fourth part of the Bionic Hybrid X210 build instructions. We're going to start off here with the two 3D printed base plates, the 4 carbon fibre arms and 4 10mm M3 bolts with nylock nuts. So we're going to start off by fitting the arms into the lowest part of the frame. I'm going to insert the middle bolts into the arms. And it's worth noting here that you may need to flex these around a bit, so don't do anything too tight at the minute. You're just trying to get the 4 bolts into those middle holes. It may be necessary here to insert the bolt and then actually start to screw it through into the plastic and round the arm. It should be a tight fit. The idea here is that all 4 arms join in the middle of the part to give it strength. So all 4 arms are touching in the middle of the model. Once you've done that, all 4 bolts should be protruding through the arms like this, ready to accept the next plate on top. So we're going to get the next plate that holds them arms to the base plate, and you notice that this is marked front, but in actual fact when fitting this part it doesn't really matter. The base plate is exactly the same, so it can go in any way really. I like to work with the front to my left, so let's do that. What we need to do is line those bolts up into those holes. Now, when you're doing this, don't go mad and screw one bolt all the way through. You just need to get it just so it's grabbing the plastic, and then start on the next one. As you can see, I've got 2 done now, and then you need to just do all 4 like that, so they're just in that position before you tighten them all up. And then once you have all 4 done, you can just go around a few turns on each one until the plate is seated on top of the arms correctly. Once you've done this, we can start applying the nylock nuts on top of these bolts. Now, just do these reasonably tight, but not too tight, because we're actually going to have to align those nuts so these actually seat into the flight controller mount correctly, and you'll see what I mean in a moment. So when we've done, we should be looking a little bit like this, nice and seated, and ready for the next part. So the next part is to make sure those nuts, as previously mentioned, are actually aligned correctly so the flight controller can sit down on top of them. Now the flight controller is designed to hold those nuts in the right place, simply because we want to be able to remove the arms later, should we break one, without taking the whole model to bits. So as you see, the actual point of the hexagonal nut is actually facing towards the side, so they need to be nice and straight, so they sit down like that. So you just need to ensure that these nuts are positioned perfectly, so that just sits down. Take a little bit of time to align them up correctly. Okay, before we actually mount the flight controller onto the base, we need to insert some nylock nuts into the top. This is so the nylon standoffs can actually attach to the top of the flight controller. Now what I do with here is I take a bolt and I screw the nut on partially so the bolt's not protruding through the nut, and then I can hammer that home down into that space. Now, it's important here that when you did the cleanup job of the flight controller mount, that you cleaned this hole out perfectly. If you remember that when we printed this, we actually had some support material there to ensure that the top part of that flight controller is in the correct place. So if you didn't clean this part out correctly, then that nut's not going to sit in the right place, and the nylon hexagonal standoff won't actually reach into the nut like you're now putting into the flight controller. So it's worth spending a little bit of time here. You might note that what I've done with the flight controller mount here is that you could actually file some of the top of those that controller mount off if indeed you couldn't actually fit that nylon standoff into place. So with that all done, it's time to start fitting the flight controller to the base. Now the nuts are in place on that flight controller, or inside that flight controller, so I should be able to now push that straight in onto there, and it should sit nice and firmly home. If it's not, then you've not got the nuts in the right place. So it's time to move on and start fitting the inner bolts that hold the arms in place. Now these can be quite difficult. They're intentionally a very tight fit, and again, it's all about being able to change an arm out should you need to in a crash without taking all the model to bits, including all the flight controller out and the PDB. So those nuts need to be quite tight. Now, so how do we get that that nut into that very tight space? Well, what I do is I use one of the longer bolts that will just slightly protrude past the flight controller, if you can see that. So you should be able to actually just put the nut actually onto that bolt. Now remember that the bolt isn't the final bolt I'm going to use. Now, in all fairness, in this area you could use that as the final bolt. I prefer ones that are more flush fitting, but you wouldn't need to do this whole process. You could just go ahead and use the longer bolt. So once it's actually on the end of the bolt, just line up the nut so it's in the perfect place to slide down. Hold the nut in that perfect place and screw the bolt. And what you need to do here is you need to keep checking to make sure the nut is still aligned. Can't quite see in the video there, but ensuring that the nut is still aligned with the hole it's going to go into the hexagonal hole. And then once you've got it, tighten it down. Eventually you won't be able to hold the nut anymore, but the actual plastic part will hold the nut and allow you to finish screwing that down. Now once I've done that, what I do is I take the longer bolt out, because now the nut's held in place by the flight controller mount, and I replace that longer bolt with the original, I believe it was a 10mm bolt. Okay, so I'll get the original 10mm bolt and put it in there. So we'll just fast forward across this bit. So when you've got all four done, you should be looking something like this at this stage. And now we need to move on to doing the same process with the 4 outer bolts. Again, I'm using my longer screw. To pull the bolt down. So it's the same process here. I'm not bored you with watching this part. Okay, so we'll just point out that you will see some sort of distortion of the plastic here as that bolt moves in. Now, we don't care about that. It's not structural. That flight controller mount is only designed that way so that we can remove 3 bolts to remove an arm. So it's not structural anyway, it's just holding the bolt in place to allow that to happen. So don't worry if you see some sort of distortion of the plastic. As long as it's holding the nut in place, it doesn't matter. The base of the actual flight controller is doing all the holding, and that's still intact. So once we've done this part now, you might find that you can get a little bit more torque now on each one of these. You should be able to tighten it up reasonably tight. I'm using ABS here again. If you're using PLA, PETG, I'm not quite sure whether this process would work so well. It's more brittle than ABS. ABS is a little bit more forgiving, so that's why I chose to use it. I do intend to run tests with PLA and PETG. Now the model's perfect in my mind, but as yet I haven't tried it, so I don't know what would happen here. It could just crack. I suspect PLA would crack indeed at this part. So moving on now to fitting the PDB to the flight controller mount. Now ensure that's the front there off to the left, and the XT60 plug needs to be back off there to the right. Now you have noticed that I've actually soldered that on there already, and I'm using wires that just, if you see, the XT60 just stretches slightly past the end of the model. Now you'll see why in a moment. We're actually gonna twist those together in a moment. But it just makes, if you make them too short, it makes the next part really difficult. So I tend to have my wires just so they're positioned, so it just almost reaches the end of the model. Now notice when you put these nylon standoffs here, you don't want to over tighten. Just literally finger tight, otherwise you'll just strip the thread. They're not going anywhere. That's absolutely fine. So with everything going quite well at the moment, it's time to actually mount the actual RX mount onto the back of the frame. This is the part where the XT60 plug should just fit in there and push in. Now it fits in either way. I'm just checking here what my other models are like, because I like to have have it the same way around, and I put it in the wrong way, so I'm just going to switch it around. Like I say, it doesn't really matter, personal preference. And twist those wires together so they're quite tight, and then if you did your cleanup job and spent a little bit of time cleaning up, this should just now pop in, because it's already been cleaned up and ready. So those 4 tabs are fitting into that base, and we use the slightly longer 14mm at least. Now you might find that to pull these in you might need to do a similar solution to what we did with the flight controller, where you put a slightly longer bolt through first and attach the nut and pull it down and get it nice and seated, and then go ahead and put the correct size bolts in. Now you will note here that I'm not using thread lock nuts. These are just normal nuts. They need to sit nice and flush inside those holes, really. Now it's very important at this stage that when you've tightened that RX mount down, you've not crushed the XT60 and caused it to warp. It will sort of bow in the middle if it is, and then the actual XT60 plug on the battery won't go in. And you should be able to plug it in at this stage. Hopefully no magic smoke. Test it out. Make sure you're happy with it. Make sure you're happy with how difficult it is to pull out. It can be quite difficult to pull out, but it's designed that way so it doesn't come out in a crash. So we're getting ready now to wrap up this part of the video, this part of the build sequence. So all we need to do now is fit the battery straps. Now the battery straps can be a little bit difficult to thread, but the upper part of that base is actually quite flat, or is flat. So all we need to do is curl the strap upwards, and then once you've done that, it should just push in and go through quite easily. So let's just see that one more time on this side. So I get the strap and I curl it up that way. It's worth thinking, by the way, here that all the models that you have might have Velcro on your batteries. So which way around this strapping needs to be. Okay, so that just about wraps up then for this part of the build process for the Bionic Hybrid X210. FPV racer. In the next video we'll start attaching the ESC wiring onto the PDB and looking at how we insulate those ESCs from the carbon fibre arms, because you're probably aware that carbon fibre is actually conductive to electricity. So we want to make sure that if one did become attached to the carbon fibre arm, it doesn't short out and burn out your PDB. Okay, well that's it for now. If you enjoyed this video and you're enjoying building along, please like, subscribe to my YouTube channel. That way you'll be notified of the next video that I upload. But thank you for watching, and goodbye.